What would battlefield nuclear weapons look like? Like, what's an example of one and how would it play out?
Sure. Well, battlefield nuclear weapon, I distinguish between battlefield use, theater use, which is more like a longer range strike into, for example, the eastern parts of the Ukraine near the border of Poland, for example. But battlefield use is limited to attacking other combat troops. It's probably going to be an air burst, not a ground detonation. They don't want the fallout coming into the Russian territory. But you can do a low yield. It could be less than a kiloton. You know, for example, Hiroshima is about 15 kilotons. It could be a 1 kiloton. It could be less than a kiloton. We gave up. We unilaterally dismantled and destroyed our tactical battlefield nuclear weapons back in 1991, the first George Bush president. It got nothing in return. Russia kept theirs, China's kept and expanded and modernized theirs. They still have them, so they could absolutely annihilate Ukrainian ground forces.
But would it be
why isn't he? Why is Putin not yet using low-yield nukes to just clear the field and take the land?
Because he hasn't been in a desperate enough situation thus far. Once you do that, you know, it is an escalation. There is a risk that, you know, potentially, you know, well, I'll give you one example. Once this happens and he gets away with it, I think he would get away with it. The U.S. is not going to respond with a nuclear attack on Russia if they do a nuclear detonation in Ukraine. That would be insane for President Biden to do. He would not do that. So if they do that and he gets away with it, now what's going to happen to nuclear nonproliferation? Because we've told all our NATO members and Japan and so many countries, we will protect you with our nuclear umbrella, and it's not believable. It's never been credible, and this will prove that it's not credible, that we will not use nuclear weapons, most likely, even to defend our allies. In Ukraine, you know, thus far is not a NATO member, not an ally we have to defend.
I've been saying basically this for a while, and I've had other people argue with me that I said mutually assured destruction is just not true. This idea that I suppose the idea is if Russia decides to nuke DC, then the U.S. will fire back at Moscow or something like that. But what I was saying is that this idea that the use of nuclear weapons in general results in everyone just firing nukes and blowing everybody up. In fact, there's one really obvious reason why NATO will not nuke back in the war. The war's in Ukraine. Russia's invaded the eastern region. Putin can fire nukes into Ukraine anywhere he wants and cause as much damage as he wants because he's trying to take it. NATO does not want to destroy Ukraine. They're trying to push Russia out. So theoretically, if Russia moves too far into Ukraine, say in the eastern region, then maybe they'll use nukes there, but they'd be effectively losing by doing it, cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Well, a couple of things I worry about here is that we're in a desperate situation. I think the Russians in some instances are desperate. I think the Ukrainians are also desperate here, and they know that they're facing a lot of very tough odds here. They have a lot of support, but at the end of the day, Russia still has a lot more manpower. Russia still has a lot more bullets, even though there's a lot of countries sending them bullets. Germany has a bullet shortage. I think this is more significant than we're that of course is not being talked about here. I think in this desperation, we shouldn't rule out the possibility of someone staging an attack or staging an incident that would escalate this situation and possibly get other countries involved here. Right now, we have Belarus do a joint military task force with Russia. They're mobilizing on the Ukrainian border. They've been mobilizing for a couple months now. But I think we're in a situation where the history of the previous world wars is rhyming. And what happened then was other countries got involved. And I think there's a big possibility that Ukraine in their desperation or Russia in their desperation could stage an event that could be the galvanizing event that could launch a bigger conflict here that would move beyond this proxy war between Russia and the United States. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, it's absolutely true that could happen. But you know, people like to make comparisons back in history, as you mentioned, back to World War II. And you know, Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons, nor did he have biological weapons or the ability to release them in the United States. Putin does. So you got a cornered dog, a guy who's desperate, wants to retain power, and we should not be provoking him. I'm glad to support Ukraine if we can, but we should not be pushing Russia and Putin, a desperate man, into a situation where he feels like the only way I'm going to stay alive and stay in power is to knock the U.S. and Western European support out of Ukraine. And I do that either with escalating with nuclear weapons, which is really risky for me because they could eventually retaliate with nuclear weapons against me, or I could be smart about it and just release a biological agent that starts a horrible pandemic in the U.S. and West Europe. I think he'd do the latter.
Now, I just want to talk about this biological agent because you bring it up a couple times. In the 1957 to 1958 avian flu pandemic, that killed 2 million people, and they say it's not as effective as a bioweapon because the host usually dies and transmission is less likely when we have such a very strong virus. Do you have any counter evidence, or is there a new type of thing that you know about from your work in intelligence that says that this is going to be different than the 1957, 1958 avian flu pandemic?
Sure, that's a very low lethality virus. I mean, it's worse than avian flu, but you're talking about like 1% lethality. For example, the so-called misnamed Spanish flu back at the end of World War I, 1919, 1920 time frame, that was like a 1.5% lethality rate. Avian flu is way less. Avian flu is way COVID-19 is like way, it's 0.001 lethality, very, very low. But avian flu, as I said, is 60% lethal. Now, when you modify it, you may get a different lethality rate. It may be a lot lower, it may be higher. I don't know. You're changing the virus.
Yeah, but the question I have is, if people are getting it and dying right away, the virus won't spread as fast.
Correct. Viruses, generally, it's better for them not to be too highly lethal. You kill off all your hosts. But again,
it's really simple. I mean, gain of function research. You get a virus. You get something as lethal as an avian flu, but you engineer it to have a 2-week delay in symptom onset.
That's the worst. That's the third thing. I mean, I've been talking about transmissibility and lethality, but Tim, you just brought up the third really bad thing. If it's got a latency period where I'm contagious, I'm spreading the virus, but I don't have any symptoms yet, then you're really, really screwed over.
We were talking about this last week that, look, nuclear weapons, the advent of which was over 80 years ago. You get this report published in 1938. I can't remember who shouted that out. Was that Will who mentioned that? 1938 on the scientific paper on fission. And then all of a sudden, everybody gets the idea like you could make a bomb with that. And then finally we did. And what was the, it was a Fat Man. Wasn't that like a 15 kiloton bomb or something like that?
That was the name of one of them was Fat Man. They're both about 15, 20 kilotons.
That's
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
nothing. 15 to 20 kilotons, nothing compared to the nukes that they currently have today, especially with MIRVs when they have multiple warheads. But bringing that up, I mean, this is old technology. You'd have to imagine they've developed different and new capabilities in modern warfare that we don't know about and we won't know about until they do. I think fair point. Biological weapons seems to be the route to take.
Who knows what Peter Daszak and the CIA are doing with Echo Health Alliance with Dr. Fauci's funding still, as they got funded again. But I think there's also another important aspect. Viruses usually don't spread well without any kind of symptoms. Sneezing, coughing is how viruses usually spread. If they develop something new, I don't know. But this would be end of the world. You launch a bioweapon, it's going to affect everyone.
Spread it through the food supply. COVID was found in ice cream. Like, it can live in animal fat. You got to watch out for food.
Just from my assessment, my research, I do think smaller escalations, more attacks on the infrastructure in Ukraine, and I think a bigger all-out war and potential false flags are more of a possibility than bioweapons from my perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, but hold on. We're not, like, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but my view is not that Putin right now is just like, flu. No, he goes with artillery, he goes nuclear artillery, he goes tactical nukes. In the event of total desperation, with U.S. involvement getting too heavy and his conventional methods not working and his escalation not working, I think I would agree that someone, maybe it's Putin, maybe it's not, someone's going to try and knock out the U.S. economy, either by, I would assume a clever way to hit the United States clandestinely, as you mentioned, is a bioweapon.
Yes, and if you remember back in March, the Russians were putting out propaganda saying, hey, the U.S. has these biological weapons programs in the Ukraine. And why in the world were they doing that? It made no sense. But they were talking about gain-of-function research and alleged that we were doing bioweapons work with the Ukrainians. This was going on in March of this year.
With Ukrainians.
Correct. Yeah. So he was trying to lay the pretext of, why would he do that? The only logical reason for the Russians to do that is because they're trying to set the stage for saying, hey, these biological weapons are coming out. It ain't us. It's the U.S. and the Ukrainians releasing it. And so, and we were concerned about that. A lot was written on that, and we pushed back saying, hey, this is nonsense.
But why wouldn't the U.S. be doing it?
Why wouldn't we be doing what?
We're building biolabs to make weapons.
Well, we signed the treaty saying we would not use biological weapons in warfare, and I think we're following that. But I think it's very probable that Putin could do that, and he could be doing it tomorrow.
Well, if you remember in Ukraine, the U.S. corporate media and political establishment first said, there's no bioweapons, there's no biolab facilities in Ukraine. And then the Secretary of State, Under Assistant Secretary, came out and said, there's medical facilities in Ukraine we got to get to immediately before the Russians get to. And everyone's like, yeah, we're doing research there. What kind of research? Gain of function research, trying to take a virus and make it the most lethal, the most dangerous virus that we can in the name of science, even though many scientists argue that there hasn't been any gain of function done for any kind of scientific discovery, but predominantly done to have bioweapons out there. So when you look at the United States, Barack Obama banned gain-of-function research. Donald Trump, for some reason, allowed it to happen, and that's when Dr. Fauci, Peter Daszak, EcoHealth Alliance went to Wuhan, China, and then started to do the COVID bat coronavirus research there. Now they're doing it again under Joe Biden, but now they're doing it in Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. Again, Peter Daszak doing gain-of-function research on COVID coronavirus. I don't know if you heard of these, but this is something eye-opening. And of course, there was also similar gain-of-function research being done in Ukraine as well.
Well, let me for a second defend the gain-of-function research, as I've already, attacked it. But the reason we do it is also avian flu is naturally mutating all the time. Every virus does. And biologists have been warning us for a long time now, congressional testimony even saying avian flu will probably mutate to be human-human transmissible, even if humans aren't screwing around with it, trying to deliberately do that. So that's why we're doing the gain-of-function research on avian flu. It is eventually going to develop, swine flu comes to pigs, develops, mutates.
But we're not talking about that.
So it's going to happen. Yeah. So they're doing the gain-of-function research because we want to have a human-human transmissible form of avian flu now so we can develop vaccines for it. That's why they're doing it. That's a legitimate reason for it.
I could understand the argument for it, but that's not what they're doing. They're doing coronavirus bat research that has no probability of ever realizing in real life because of natural circumstances.
Right. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast. And there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and we'll see you all there.